Are the wheels coming off Boris Johnson's juggernaut? Boris was flying high back in February. He had won a massive majority. He had convinced the public to back him with his oven-ready Brexit deal. The opposition were floundering and he was in control. All seemed to have been going better than expected for him. Then the pandemic struck. Data shows, and experts have claimed, that if the UK had gone into lockdown just 1 week earlier in March, it would have had potentially halved the current death toll, which stands at the time of the making of this video at just over 46,000. But let's skip ahead to this week, a week of utter chaos. There wasn't one U-turn, but there were two over the last number of days. The first was on travel to Spain. The second was on lockdown measures affecting over 4.5 million people in the north of England. Both of these were broadcast to the public without almost any notice. Now, the public at home and those on holiday abroad have reacted with anger. But we have to understand, while the Tories were doing a half-arsed job of dealing with this pandemic, it doesn't mean that they're not potentially worried about a second wave. Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, has been in a bit of a tizzy about how to deal with Spain. This is one of the most popular destinations for Brits. Almost 2 million people have had planned to visit the country in August. The UK had an air bridge with Spain, but due to rising cases, he had to think whether it was a good idea to keep that in place. There was also the issue of what would happen to people flying back from the Mediterranean. Would they have to self-isolate or not? Hancock's hand was forced by cases of infected holidaymakers returning to the UK. Now, these first cases were very small, but he knew that this was just the tip of the iceberg. This meant that many British citizens who were told that Spain was safe were then told at 7:30 in the evening on Twitter that if they planned to return to the UK, they would have to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Now, this created a minor panic, as many people were unsure if their employers would permit this, and many others did not have measures in place to deal with a 2-week personal lockdown. So Spain was moved from safe to unsafe for travel. Shortly after, Luxembourg was also added to that list. Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock probably thought their problems, while serious, had been dealt with. But shortly after, a group of leading medical experts who spoke to an all-party parliamentary committee expressed grave concerns about a second wave or a possible spike in new cases. They were particularly worried about a combination of winter factors that would help the spread of the virus. Remember, during the warmer weather, people tend to spend more time outside, but as the weather gets colder and wetter, we pass more time indoors in closer contact with others, which is one of the factors considered. Also, the impact of the winter flu is not fully known. In their worst-case scenario, they predicted up to 120,000 deaths. A few days ago, probably the most damning data yet for the government was that England had the worst excess death toll in Europe in the first 6 months of this year. Following this came news of a rise in new cases, a possible cluster in the north of England. At 5 p.m. on the day of the lockdown, the eve of Eid, the Muslim festival, the mayor of Greater Manchester was instructed by the government to lock down. Then a few hours later, Matt Hancock sent a tweet about the lockdown, putting enormous pressure on the local government. One local authority was trying to work out the details as Matt Hancock was appearing on Sky News. Just think about that for a moment. However, the lockdown was not a true lockdown, as it was only a restriction on members of the public meeting in private homes. Pubs, restaurants, and places of work like offices were not to be impacted. This, of course, begs the question, why call it a lockdown? A number of new openings which were due to start on the 1st of August were shelved, including casinos and bowling alleys, and pilot sports events have also been postponed for at least 2 weeks. Publicly, government officials are saying that Boris Johnson's administration is dealing with these new outbreaks in a dynamic way. Privately, according to some media sources, officials are calling it a shitfest. The most important opinion is that of the public. Once that voters turn sour on a PM, it's the beginning of the end. The handling of the pandemic, the lockdown, the easing of the lockdown is not going down very well with the public at large. And as anger and dissatisfaction grows, the Conservative Party will seek to jettison Boris Johnson. Now, at the moment, the blame is firmly squared upon his shoulders, and the Tories would like to see it remain that way. But as soon as the blame begins to spread, somewhat like the pandemic itself, the Tories will decide to quarantine Boris Johnson, perhaps permanently. Let me know in the comments section what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun? If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.